The 11th day of the 11th month, the time when we honour those killed in conflicts around the world. But for those soldiers who do return, the battle continues in their minds and in their fight for help.
You know, I used to command men on a field of battle, doing our job, and now something as small as a bit of toothpaste on a sink can ruin my day.
In Wales, no funding comes, so you can look at it as a country lottery, not a postcode lottery.
I was just convinced that the Taliban were after him and he'd be watching us. They're outside the door, he'd say, and I said, no, but there's nobody here.
Veterans with broken limbs gain instant sympathy, but mental illness is still a taboo in the armed forces. So are our service men and women getting the support they need here in Wales?
No doubt they'll soon get well. The shock and strain have caused their stammering, disconnected talk. Of course they're longing to go out again. These boys with old, scared faces, learning to walk.
Siegfried Sassoon, writing after the First World War, describes shell shock. Today it's called post-traumatic stress disorder, which is said to affect up to 1 in 4 soldiers who've seen active service. Veterans often don't know where to go for help and feel isolated without the routine of army life. 29-year-old Stephen Anquetil from the Gwent Valleys left the Welsh Warriors 3 years ago. He still has vivid memories of Iraq, where he saw his friend blown up.
I knew straight away who it was, that it was my friend. And that was probably the worst thing, because you've still got to carry on and do your job. No, you know your mate has just been spread across an area the size of a football pitch, but you've got to carry on and carry on with the job that you've been tasked.
He says being under attack for 4 months left him traumatised.
I never saw myself as ever going to have a problem with mental health. I was considered a robust soldier. I had no clue that all the while, as all I was doing was putting walls up and blocking my real feelings about shooting, about killing, about watching people die, about seeing people die, and about feeling the fear of death. You know, just going through a street of a town where you know everyone there hates you and wants you dead.
Neil Christie was a captain in the Royal Marines and was discharged in January 2008 due to his mental health.
I started to experience sort of flashbacks, depression, emotional anxiety, instability, and eventually within a year of coming back from Afghanistan, I was medically discharged from the Royal Marines with post-traumatic stress adjustment disorder. And I found it very difficult to adjust to life outside the military.
Neil, who is now an outdoor activities instructor in North Wales, spent 4 years in the Royal Marines and 5 years before that in the reserves. His service left him with images he simply can't erase.
One of the stronger flashbacks I had was of identifying a colleague who died in combat in Afghanistan, and just seeing his face and having this negative emotion of just grief and sadness with that image. And sometimes I wouldn't even have that image, but I'd just have that feeling and I'd be reduced to tears and essentially break down.
Neil says he believes there's not enough help for troops leaving service or returning from combat zones, and that if the problem was addressed when on tours of duty, fewer soldiers would leave or be discharged.
I had some medical support during my discharge process through a military psychiatrist and a counsellor within the Defence Centres for Mental Health, DCMHs. looking back, they offered what they had available at the time, but it wasn't really that effective for me. And subsequently I went downhill on leaving the service in terms of getting sectioned under the Mental Health Act within 3 months of being medically discharged from the Marines. And it wasn't until sort of just over a year later that I got effective treatment, as well as being allegedly supported by the NHS. They did their best, but a psychiatrist openly acknowledged to me, Neil, we don't have the expertise to actually treat your PTSD symptoms.
How do you feel that today? Yeah, well, that's normal, don't worry. Come on in.
In Wales, the NHS has just launched what they call a groundbreaking initiative, following a 2-year pilot study into the mental health of veterans. The Welsh Assembly Government has pledged £485,000 a year, the first time Wales has funded a specialist veterans service.
Well, I think we've developed a model here in Wales to have a hub and spoke model. So Cardiff is the hub and 5 spokes with a community-based model. So we don't believe, and there's no evidence to show, that we need to admit people into beds to treat their PTSD. So that's a very expensive model. And the background to that was, I think the government were unhappy with the current arrangements for service men, veterans who have left, who have PTSD, going into inpatient facilities.
Okay, just bring up that image, Gary, when you were shot in Afghanistan 3 years ago.
They use psychological treatments including talking therapies, counselling and eye movement desensitisation reprogramming, or EMDR. These treatments are all based on guidelines recognised by the government.
It's not hypnotherapy. The patient, as you saw, was in complete control and they could stop me at any time. So that's an important point. Success rate, we've got good evidence that through randomised controlled trials, and there are at least 11 randomised controlled trials for EMDR that show it's very effective in reducing post-traumatic stress symptoms.
Stephen Anquetil was diagnosed with PTSD when the Cardiff project was still at the pilot stage but wasn't treated straight away. He was working as a salesman, but his commission-only income was hit by the recession. He lost his home, leaving him, his wife and 2 children in a hostel. They've now been rehomed.
Unfortunately, got to a stage where I felt it was time to end it, and I was driving in my car and I knew that at the end of the road is a sharp right turn and the bridge, and I knew that all I had to do was put my foot down and just don't bother making the turn. Fortunately, I had Bianca in the car with me and she stopped me. So what went from a blaze of glory and driving off became a slamming on the brakes, pulling over and sobbing my eyes out for half hour.
Stephen had to wait for 2.5 years before attending a combat stress treatment centre.
Just having that knowledge of what's actually wrong with you, rather than just knowing there's something wrong but I don't know what it is or don't even understand what it is, that's the first step to recovery in my eyes, because once you know what you're dealing with, you can make a plan against it.
The charity Combat Stress, set up in 1919, has seen demand from veterans jump 70%. It's estimated there are up to 9,000 veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan needing psychological help. Unlike many other charities in the field, Combat Stress does get UK government funding, over £3 million linked to the war pensions.
What we currently provide are 3 short-stay specialist residential treatment centres, this one here in Surrey, we've got another one in Shropshire and another one in Scotland, but allied to that and totally linked to it is a welfare service that is being rapidly expanded into a community outreach service. And in Wales, we have a community outreach team based in North Wales, and we're trying to fund the South of Wales community outreach team. And those teams will provide care in the community, both for veterans, but also, and more importantly sometimes, their families.
Veterans are angry that so many charities seem to be picking up the pieces when the Ministry of Defence should be more supportive. The MOD told Wells this week that it was working closely with the NHS and Combat Stress to make sure GPs tell veterans about the help available. It's also set up a dedicated 24-hour support line and is recruiting mental health nurses UK-wide.
There's no magic wand. You know, we've got to face the realities of the fact that soldiers go to war, and war's not pretty, war's not glorious, war's horrible. Plain and simple.
The gap in provision of help for veterans is evident in Mid-Wales, where Michael Hughes and his mother say they felt abandoned. The 26-year-old gunner left the army in 2008, having served in Iraq and Afghanistan. His mother says he returned a different man.
He'll never be Michael. He's lost his sparkle. He used to have a good sense of humour, but the sparkle's gone there. No. One night he was down here watching the telly. When I come down, what are you doing? He was trying to dig a hole in my carpet. And it was like he was trying for a shelter. And then another time we had to do army crawls everywhere. I think he realised that where he was, but then Mum, because he kept saying, well, Mum, you've got to watch your back and you've got to look out because there's somebody coming.
Yeah, I've certainly seen veterans here who will have a nightmare or flashback and believe that the Taliban are outside and check all their windows, check the doors and look out the window, believing they're still back in Afghanistan or Iraq for several minutes. And we also know that veterans have an increased startle response, so when there's loud noises they will often hit the floor. That's their training.
When Michael was serving in Afghanistan, he had already decided to leave the Highland Gunners Regiment because his previous experience in Iraq traumatised him. He came back even worse.
Quite hard, really. Well, you get a lot of anxiety, panic attacks, flashbacks, a lot of flashbacks, nightmares. Might sound a bit childish, but you wet the bed a lot. Because, I don't know, I suppose your nightmares and whatever. After big shocks, like, I don't know. But obviously turned to alcohol and drugs and that.
Michael and his mother say they received no help when he left the army in 2008. On leaving the services, the NHS becomes responsible for veterans' health, not the MOD. It was only when Ruth contacted Combat Stress